All right, what is going on? What is up? Checking in here. It is Tuesday, March 22nd, and it has been a long time since I uploaded a YouTube video. And I'm pretty deep into Ironman training right now, so I wanted to just jump in and give some updates on fueling and share a little bit about what I'm up to and what I've changed since my last video. And I also wanted to give a couple of updates on just how my training is going. I had some interesting shit go down this weekend that I just wanted to document here for you. I'm a little bit out of breath. I'm not really sure why. I'm excited about this. Deep breath. Cool. Okay. So the last time that I checked in here on a video, I was pretty strict on the low carb fueling approach. I think I did a video after Boulder 70.3, and I did not change that approach for then when I did 70.3 Worlds a couple weeks later, and then when I did Ironman Indiana a couple of weeks after that. So for all races and triathlons that I did in 2021, I did the low carb fueling approach, which basically meant that I was not taking in any carbs in the morning before exercise, before the training started, before the racing started. I was doing like the fatty coffee thing where I have some collagen protein, some MCT oil so that I have a little bit of a caloric intake, but I was not taking in any carbs. And what I was doing then is I was going into racing fasted, doing the swim fasted, and then I was starting to fuel with carbs on the run. And there are two real main reasons that I was doing that. One was that I was really, really deep into just fasting in general and eating low carb in general. And two is that I was hooked on the idea that if you are somebody who fasts or who eats with a low carb diet, you can leverage free fatty acid fueling and glucose fueling if you wait 30 to 40 minutes into exercise to begin fueling with glucose. So that was the whole idea on delaying my carb intake. Overall, I think that I did pretty well. I mean, I went sub 5 at Boulder, qualified for Worlds, which was great. At Worlds, I did really well. That was like a super crazy day with some crazy weather on the bike. So I put out probably less energy than I was capable of on the bike. But my run was super, super solid as a result of it. And even though I still did the low carb fueling for that race, it didn't really bite me in the butt because I did not overexert myself on the bike. The bike was nuts. There was like the most torrential rain I have ever biked in. People were like pulling over. At some points I was just doing my best to make sure my bike didn't tip. So my heart rate was down. I still had a solid bike overall, like it was super fun. But in terms of like a consistent energy output, it was nowhere near what my bike leg was for Boulder. Then going into Ironman Indiana, I did the exact same thing and I ran into some big issues with fueling. The big issue being that was obviously double the swim distance from the 70.3s, and it was just too long of a swim to be doing without any carb intake. It was a 2-lap swim, and on the second lap, I cramped up super bad twice, and kind of a third time. The two main times I had to come to like a complete stop in the water and kind of recompose myself. It was basically the exact same thing that happens if you've ever gotten a leg cramp when you're sleeping and like all of a sudden you're like freaking out, like tensing your leg, trying to like stiffen it or stretch it, or you don't even know what. But anyway, that happened twice, which is just a direct, obvious indication that I was underfueled. So exiting out of that, and I guess overall, I think I was underfueled on the run mainly. I must have overfueled on the bike leg, but I felt underfueled on the run, and overall, specifically that day, I just think I was underfueled, even though I still did quite well. 11 hours and 15 minutes is super solid, I think, for your first Ironman. So coming out of that, I have basically switched to carbohydrate fueling, which obviously pretty much everybody who's successful at triathlon does that, but I needed to learn myself and go through some of my own failures and shortcomings to really realize that. So what I'm doing now is basically fueling very heavily with carbs, both before, during, and after training. And the big thing that I've been navigating is that I still do not want to be using really any processed fuel to be having during these Ironman races, during training, really at any point. I'm still really not eating anything processed. If you go back to my carnivore and plant-based videos, that was really the big takeaway from that diet challenge, and that has stuck with me a ton. So now that I'm moving in carbs, like I'm still not interested in just all of a sudden like having a bunch of goos and gels and that kind of shit. So what I have really, really picked up and grown to love is maple syrup fueling. And it's kind of funny because like I was so low carb last year that now like the idea of me literally drinking maple syrup on my bike rides and on my runs is kind of crazy. But I've learned a lot about how just the body processes fuel and how ultimately carbs and sugar are the exact same thing to the body. So the fact that I'm taking in pure natural sugar in the form of maple syrup is essentially pure carbohydrates, and it's going directly into my bloodstream, which can be used as energy. I have had some super, super solid progress too with my blood glucose readings. So I guess that's another big update since I checked in last. Levels Health has hooked me up with a continuous glucose monitor. I'm not wearing it right now, but it basically slaps on the back of my arm and it gives me glucose readings continuously, CGM. And so actually 2 weekends ago, I did a 5.5 hour ride with pure maple syrup fueling every 15 minutes on the dot. And my blood glucose was like insanely stable. I actually hadn't been wearing the CGM for a while because I was kind of nervous about seeing really high spikes and declines with increased carbohydrate intake in my diet. And I knew that the carbs were more important for race fueling than letting, I guess, myself be negatively influenced by seeing that data jumping up and down and potentially having me cut back on carbs because I'm seeing that, which is sort of exactly what happened when I first started wearing it, which I guess was right after Ironman Indiana in October. So anyway, that's like the big change in my carb fueling, and the big thing that I'm like really, really learning a lot about it is that I can pair an exact amount of fueling that I need with what level heart rate I'm at. So it is now March, so I've only done one outdoor ride, technically two actually. I got flats both times this weekend. I'll check in on that in a second. But I've basically been using my indoor training as a way to just turn my pain cave into a complete laboratory. So like I know exactly to the minute when I am fueling, I know exactly how much I'm fueling with both maple syrup, with water, and then when I'm pairing that with the CGM data, I'm getting really, really good validation that taking in, I think the data from this most recent one was 90 grams of carbs an hour. Again, pure maple syrup. My heart rate average was 124 for the 5.5 hour ride, and I put out 168 watts. That was my watt average, and I believe that my cadence average was 79. So I'm starting to like really circle the wagons on a lot of the metrics that I'm putting out. I have a new bike coming in a couple of weeks that will have a power meter, but I do not have that just yet. So just in terms of how that was a comparison, or how it's just a comparison to how I was racing last year. Last year I was only going off of heart rate. I didn't have any other data accessible to me. And now that I've just been a bit more dialed in on the trainer, I'm really looking at heart rate, I'm looking at watts, I'm looking at cadence, and I'm obviously measuring my fueling. I think that those are the big ones. So then the goal is that everything I've been practicing in the pain cave, I will be able to translate outside, which I kind of tried to do this weekend, but without much of that data. But I'll ultimately be trying to do that a ton once this new bike comes in. Okay, so that's a good solid spot on the fueling. I think one other thing to note is just that I am using water and salt is just like the hydration that I'm taking in. I was doing LMNT for my races this past year, but ultimately that stuff is kind of expensive. It's like $50 for a box, which I think only lasts me like 2 or 3 weeks. And like if I just get out of the habit of using it, then I don't really miss it. And salt water is essentially doing the trick to give me at least the electrolyte function. Plain water's a no-no. Okay, so that's a good summary on fueling, I think. And I really just wanted to jump on here because I got my ass kicked kind of this weekend. So like I said, I've been doing all of my training inside. It's been winter out here in Colorado, super snowy. And I've been really loving the opportunity to basically dial in all those metrics that I just mentioned. I'm going to go ahead and put some potatoes on. Give me a second here. Okay, not burning, cool. So I've been doing all my training inside, and I am doing Ironman Texas, which is now exactly a month and a day away. It's April 23rd. And so it's about time that I get outside and really just become comfortable riding outside, because it's super different riding outside versus inside. Which this is really the first time that I'm recognizing this, because prior to this winter, I was never really doing long rides on the trainer. Anytime that I had a long ride, I would just go do it outside. And if I had shorter rides, maybe under an hour and a half or something like that, I would do them inside back when we lived in Philly. So now ultimately I've switched that, and I've become really comfortable doing like 4.5, 5.5 hour rides on the trainer. I've really cranked out like a string of those in like the thick of February, I guess. And now it's time to take it outside. And so I rode outside, and I just got to learn a shit ton about bike maintenance and how to handle winter riding versus spring versus summer, all that good stuff. So first ride, I was supposed to go out for 4 hours, and then I had a 30-minute run coming off of it. And this was on Saturday, and I rode for 15 minutes, got a flat, fixed the flat, rode for about 25 more minutes, and then got another flat. And I had no more fixings, no more CO2, no other tubes. So I called Chels for a ride, and I got new tubes, and I threw them back in the tire. And then I rode on Sunday, and what was supposed to be a 4-hour ride that was kind of supposed to be like an endurance ride, in my mind, really like replicating how I would be performing for Texas, which is ultimately quite a flat course. And this was going to be my first outdoor ride from our new house in Colorado. And I was just like, fuck it. I am going to the mountains. I am going to climb my ass off, and I'll just zigzag around on the flatter roads after that. So I rolled out of the driveway. My bike was all pumped up. I really took everything apart yesterday after the flats, or the day before after the flats, and rolled out of the driveway 5,000 feet. And within 18 miles, I was at 7,500 feet. And so it was basically 80 minutes of just like pretty much nonstop climbing, a few miles to get out there. But even in just kind of the introductory part of that ride, I could just tell that like riding outside, like I was just more like jazzed up a little bit. My heart rate was higher. Like I was just kind of getting myself acclimated after really not riding outside at all for like 6 months, I guess, 3 months, at least 3 months, 3, 4, 5 months. I guess ultimately like around the time of Indiana is the last time that I probably rode outside, or at least did like a big ride. So my heart rate was up. Then all of a sudden I'm like into the mountains. I'm immediately climbing, and I just wanted to go as high as possible. I got to like 7,000 feet. I saw a road I hadn't taken before, and I was like, fuck it, I'm going. So I turned, just kept climbing, and it was like, it was literally easily the biggest climb that I've ever done. And I wrapped it up in about 80 minutes. And one thing that is like so apparent riding out here in Colorado is like, you think it takes a lot of practice to get good at hills, and you think that you need to practice a lot to get good at climbing, obviously. But I think that what's really shocking to me is that you need a shit ton of practice going downhill. And I am just not very good at going downhill, especially when it's super steep. So I climbed directly up to 7,500 feet. Immediately came down, and I'm like gripping the brakes the whole time, like basically just trying not to have the bike fall over. If it's like a moderate decline and like not crazy steep, like I'm pretty solid, but like I can definitely just tell that I have so much room to improve, especially when it's super steep, and especially if I don't like visually see the exit of the hill. Like if I can see where we're headed, I can be a little bit more fearless with either like staying in aero or not triggering on the brakes. If I kind of know that as soon as I get to a certain spot, I'll probably be able to crank the chain again, and I'll have the tension of my lower body to really stabilize the whole bike. But when it's like a super steep decline and it's not really, the end isn't really in sight, like it takes another level of skill as a rider, and I'm just not there yet. So I will have a lot of fun practicing that, but that was just kind of like a side note there. After I did that, I basically tried to find the flatter roads that are around like the Boulder Res area, a lot of the Boulder 70.3 course. And my ride was going solid. I could definitely feel that I was shot from the climb, but I don't think I really recognized how like shot I was. When I checked back in my heart rate data from that ride, like the heart rate distribution is like evened out between my zone 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, which is up at my max. Like the toggle distance of like the bar graph is all sort of similar. And that ride was like supposed to be almost all zone 1, maybe a little zone 2. So live and learn, whatever the hell it is, not really a huge deal. But I got to the flats, basically started to just ride around a little bit, got into a couple of good flows, but I was also pretty fatigued. One thing about that ride was that I did a super, super good job with my maple syrup fueling, but I did a terrible job with my hydration. So this was like a 3-hour ride, and I literally drank like a little bit more than a water bottle. I think that like since I was just climbing so much in the beginning, like I didn't really just decide to keep grabbing down on the water bottle. I was having a little bit of difficulty drinking out of my Aero bottle, probably just because like I haven't done it in a long time. But anyway, I definitely started to like wane a little bit on that ride, but the big issue was that I ultimately got another flat. And this flat was like different. Like it didn't completely blow like the two the day before. It was just like, I could tell that the bike was on a low tire pressure for a little while. And I eventually like looked at it and saw it. Sometimes when you look, you like can't really see it, but I looked at it and I was like, okay, the tire is definitely wider than the rim by a good margin. So I just stopped, checked quickly, and like, it was like basically like a kid's bike tire. Like I could push into it, and it wasn't like completely dead, but like also it was nowhere near pumped up. Like if I had to guess, it was probably like under 50 PSI. But I was like, all right, well I can kind of keep riding on this. And like, I was getting close to 50 miles and I was like, all right, I want to hit 50 and maybe I can make it home, but we'll see. So I ended up finishing that ride and got just over 50 miles. And then like, I could kind of tell that the bike was just like, there was really no point to keep riding all the way home. So I called Chelsea for a ride, and I felt pretty good about the ride, honestly. Like it was 50 miles, it was 3 hours. Like my speed wasn't great, but that's because I did an ass load of climbing. But as time just started to set in after that ride, like I just started to feel super defeated for some reason. And I was like, fuck, like the fatigue really, really started to set in. Like I got on the couch and I was like, shit, like I haven't been this crushed by a ride in ages. Like even maybe before I started working with my coach in June of this past year. So like back when I was just riding kind of casually and I would just go randomly take on big rides and really kill myself, or really crush myself. And I just like had that feeling again. And then I was all of a sudden like, shit, if I'm getting crushed the same way that I like was getting crushed, like is any of my training even working? And then all of a sudden I'm like starting to like, just like question everything that I'm doing. And it's like, do I even think that I could qualify for Kona? Like, am I anywhere even fucking close to that? And it was really weird because one, I just haven't been beaten down like that by a ride in a while. But two, it was like, I could sense that those thoughts weren't like real. Like I knew that I thought differently. I was like, yes, I'm trained well enough. And yes, I think I can qualify for Kona. And yes, I want to be doing this. And I love this. But at the same point, like I kind of saw those thoughts, those negative ones, like just hanging out and like kind of heckling me. And so like I kind of just sat on it for a little while, and I told Chelsea about it, and I sent my coach a note kind of detailing everything. And I ultimately just gave myself a little bit of time on it. That was on Sunday evening. We had some friends over and I had a good time. But then on Monday, like some of that started to set in a little bit, some of those thoughts. And ultimately, like I just took it easy that day. I ate pretty well. I got a nice little lift in, a nice little recovery swim and some sauna time. And just gave myself like a chance to take a deep breath on a couple of things. I've just got kind of a lot of shit going on right now with us just moving into this place, my training, everything that I'm doing at my corporate job and with my coaching business. It's just kind of a lot for me right now. But it's weird because it's not like all of them are a lot individually. It's just more like together. I don't want to say things feel like they're hanging by a thread, but when one thing gets super rocked, it's like everything else starts to get wobbly. So I just sort of let myself feel that out, and I don't know. It was kind of cool to like just reflect on that and just sort of be like, this is probably a huge moment of progress for me. Like the fact that I feel like I'm being humbled down to like beginner mode again is potentially like an awesome fucking sign, and potentially saying that like I'm about to take a huge step. Which I haven't really had that perspective before. Like I almost feel like I'm like a degree removed from it in a way that I haven't ever felt before. And yeah, I guess one thing that like it's really giving me a chance to recognize is that like you are in complete control of your perspective. And I could choose to have a perspective that my ride this weekend was not what it was supposed to be. It sort of stunk because it was shorter than I wanted it to be. I didn't even get to do my run off of the bike. And my heart rate was all over the fucking place. And all these other things about my flat tires and this and that and the other, hydration. But like, as much as that opinion and perspective is right there, it's like there's also this other perspective that I could just like decide to take. And the perspective that I want to take is like, you fucking crushed yourself, dude, with a huge ride. And you're going to get a lot of gain from that. And you're not even giving yourself credit for the fact that your maple syrup fueling was awesome out on the road, which is way different than on the trainer. Like I was on the money. Every 15 minutes, I was like, boom, boom, boom. And ultimately, like it fueled me enough, I think. I think what sucked and held me back was my hydration. But like that's an opportunity to recognize again how important my hydration is. And my flat tires, I honestly don't really let flat tires bother me. I honestly don't. Like I feel like that's just such an unintelligent thing to do. Like a flat tire happened, it can be a little bit annoying, sure, but like am I gonna waste my energy being fucking mad at this innate tire that is already flat and there's nothing I can do, or at least that I'm deciding to do? Like, why would I waste energy getting mad at that? It already happened. Big whoop. I needed a new tire. Now I know what it looks like the next time I need a new tire. So I don't know. I think that's probably a good place to wrap up. I wanted to share a little bit about my fueling stuff because it really has changed a lot, and I've really learned a lot, and I really like what I'm doing right now. And I also think that I learned a lot this past weekend. Riding outside is like a whole nother beast, especially in the spring. Like I don't really think I'm giving myself enough credit for the fact that like it just takes a little bit of time to adjust to riding outside. It's good that I got out there. It's good that I got my ass kicked. And riding in like the summer is obviously going to be different than riding in March. Like this was literally like basically the first weekend that I could have ridden outside, and I did. And it was still, I needed to go out in gloves. Like it was 32 degrees or something like that in the morning. So yeah, that's what I got. I think I'm going to qualify for Kona at Texas. I really do. I had an awesome 5:30 ride into an hour run 2 weeks ago, and I ran 728 miles. My heart rate average was 141, and it was honestly up near like 149 for most of the back half of that run. And I've never run like that off the bike. And I heard a super, super cool thing that I'll leave you with. Ryan Hall on the Peter Attia podcast, one of the best runners of all time, he shared this idea that you need to get excited about how you're doing during running. And I had never thought about that before. And as soon as I heard that, I was like, oh my God, that 728 hour run off the bike last week, the entire time I was excited. And I was so excited that I just kept pushing it. And because I pushed it, I got more excited and my body could handle it because I fueled it well. So I think that is going to be the secret to me qualifying for Kona at Texas. And I believe I'm going to do it. Let's go.